ultimately, you have no power to force another person's choice. You can, as the fallen beings do, take advantage of that person's psychology and thereby push their choices. But you understand what I'm saying? Even if you push other people's choices, this is not going to reform them. It's not going to reform the fallen being. It's not going to change the other people in a positive direction where they grow. You can change them in a negative direction by forcing their choices. But you cannot force a positive choice. It must come from within that life stream, and in many cases it only comes when they've had enough of a certain experience. But of course, what you can do is you can inspire them to make a higher choice by showing them that there is an alternative to their state of consciousness. There is a higher way. And by inspiring them, by demonstrating to them, you may cause them to make another choice. But it is not you that is reaching into their minds and creating a change. It is them voluntarily making a different choice. Now, of course, if they hadn't seen you demonstrate this higher state of consciousness, as Jesus has said, if he hadn't demonstrated that you can walk the earth in the Christ consciousness, they wouldn't have had the option. So that's what you can do. You can give them the option. You cannot force their choice. And of course, you can do what the fallen beings are doing and trying to force people's choices in a downward direction. But my beloved, that surely is not why you are here as an avatar. Because look at the mess that is existing on earth. And what is the cause of it? It is that the fallen beings have forced people to make choices that put them in a downward spiral. And as I'm saying, you cannot force somebody to make choices that will put them in an upward spiral. And therefore, you need to, as an avatar, to completely let go of this desire to reform or change any other person. Only then can you be the open door for unconditional love. Why am I saying that you can have human love, but you can be the open door for unconditional love? Well, because human love is possessive, and that means you can possess it. You can own it. There are people in the world, even many who think they are spiritual and New Age people, who think they are very loving people. But they are loving in a human way, where they are subconsciously using that love to get something from people. In some cases, they are not having an evil intent. They are not actually manipulating other people in a direct manner. But they have this personal inner desire to be seen as very loving. So when they express love towards other people, it is so that they can get these other people to validate their inner desire to be seen as loving. Oh, you're such a loving person. And then they feel validated. The ego feels validated. You cannot own possessive love. You cannot own unconditional love. You cannot own non-possessive love. But you can open yourself to it as you can open yourself to Christhood. What is unconditional love? Well, it is the omega aspect of the Christ consciousness. You cannot own the Christ consciousness. You cannot force the Christ consciousness. You cannot, with the outer mind, the dualistic mind, the analytical mind, you cannot force. You can pretend to be the Christ, but it doesn't make you the Christ. You can try to create phenomena that seems to show you have great power, mind over matter, as even the book describes Lucifer was able to do. But this is not Christhood. And so you can have human love, and you can make people think that you are so loving, but this is not Christ love. Christ love, as we have said, the Holy Spirit floweth where it listed, but it flows wherever there is an opening. There has to be an opening. And if you have a desire to change other people, there will not be an opening in your being through which unconditional love can flow. It is very, very possible that if you express unconditional love towards a fallen being, they will reject it. They will feel disturbed by it. They might even accuse you, or they might withdraw from you and want to have nothing to do with you. This you need to accept. And we have talked about the revolutionary shifts. We have said that there can come a point where you have resolved your psychology, even resolved your primal self and your birth trauma. You have consumed the energy, you have let the self die, but there is another separate self that still can have a certain attachment. For example, you feel that if you are the open door for unconditional love, then you should not be rejected. People should not reject you. And there are actually people who have come to the point, to the level of Christhood, where they could be the open door for expressing unconditional love towards another person. And then that love was rejected, and then the person, because they had that separate self, actually could sometimes go into a downward spiral of being so disturbed that this love was rejected that it actually took them down in consciousness. And they might even have decided never again to express unconditional love. And so you need to recognize that even when you are able to be the open door for unconditional love, there can still be that separate self that has some kind of image of what should happen when you express unconditional love. You can, for that matter, also have a self that has some kind of image of what should happen when you speak your truth and challenge the fallen beings, or when you express your higher being. You see, my beloved, again, Christhood, being the living Christ, expressing Christhood, does not mean you are completely perfect, that you have resolved every aspect of your psychology, that you are at the 144th level. You can, even when you go beyond the 48th level, you can have glimpses where you express Christhood, or even a certain higher form of love. When you go beyond the 96th level, you can have glimpses, and more frequent glimpses, even longer periods, where you are in the Christ consciousness, you are expressing unconditional love. But you are still, of course, have to get up to the 144th level. That means there are still illusions you have not overcome, and some of these illusions can be related to you thinking that other people should respond in a pure manner when you are approaching them in a pure manner. You see, my beloved, avatars have come from natural planets. On a natural planet, you are used to that when you do something for others with pure intentions, they will not turn around and accuse you of being a bad person. But when you do something for a fallen being, or even human beings on earth, they may indeed reject you in a very aggressive, nasty, very unkind, accusatory manner. And so, even when you come to that point where you can express Christhood, whether the Alpha or the Omega aspect, you still need to be aware that there can be a self in you, or an illusion you haven't let go of, that causes you to feel rejected or go into other negative reactions when other people don't respond the way you expect them to respond. And in these cases, you then need to be willing to look at yourself and take this as an opportunity to overcome another illusion, to let another separate self go, so you can rise to the next level up, where you can express more unconditional love and be more non-attached to how people receive it. Ultimately, in order to express the fullness of unconditional love, you need to be completely non-attached to how other people respond to it. Because you're not doing it with any intention. The rose that grows in the garden has no intention of pulling people who walk by into sticking their nose into the flour. It does not feel rejected when they rush by tapping on their smartphones because they have to absolutely answer that latest SMS. And so this is the higher levels of Christhood. I understand that it is not the lower levels of Christhood. You don't need to blame yourself for having this reaction. I'm not saying this because we do not in any way want you to discourage you from expressing Christhood. Again, you do not have to be perfect to express Christhood. And at the lower levels, you will have situations, you will have moments where you are the open door and there's something is flowing through you, whether on higher idea or whether unconditional love. And then suddenly the spell is broken, so to speak. Now you are out of it, back to your normal level of consciousness. And that means that you are now using your normal level of consciousness to react to the consequences of you expressing Christhood. In other words, you react to other people's reactions, not at the level of Christhood that you just expressed, but with your normal level of consciousness. My beloved, this is inevitable. This is part of the path to Christhood. And you may think that this didn't happen to Jesus, but of course it happened to Jesus. He also had a period where he was very hesitant about expressing his Christhood, where he was very sensitive about people's reactions to it. And so, you see, my beloved, we have all gone through this phase. And we have no desire whatsoever to discourage you, because what we want you to realize is that it's inevitable. You have to go through this interim phase where you switch in and out of Christhood, and where you therefore inevitably will react with your normal level of consciousness to the consequences of expressing your Christhood. And this means that it can be painful, it can be difficult, you can even feel you have done something wrong, you were too strong, you were too forceful, or you were too loving and too kind, or whatever. And you need to learn to see through this and see that this reaction in you is an opportunity for you to step up to the next level of consciousness, to overcome that illusion associated with your present level, and to step up to a higher level where you can express more Christhood. And then, as you become consciously aware of this process, you can quickly make that shift where now you no longer blame yourself, you're not coming down on yourself, you're not feeling you are imperfect, you just realize the absolute truth that we have actually been trying to tell you in the Path to Self-Mastery books, and that Nada made great efforts to help you see in the 6th book. And that is that there comes that point on the path where you recognize that you are not at the highest level of consciousness. You will recognize that you are at the 87th level and not the 144th level. And you are not required to be able to deal with life on earth the way you can at the 144th level. It is perfectly all right, perfectly acceptable to us as Ascended Masters that you react to life at the 87th level or whatever level you are at. We are never demanding or expecting that you should react with a higher level. We are never blaming you for not reacting with a higher level. I realize there have been previous Ascended Master teachings and organizations where they've created a culture where people were blamed for not being perfect. But again, we have to start somewhere. And so what you have the potential to step up to is to actually, in a sense, make peace with yourself as you are right now. This doesn't mean that you stop your growth and that you go into this state of thinking, now I'm ego-free, now I'm perfect, I don't need to grow, I don't need to look at myself. But you can make peace with being at the level of consciousness you are at, instead of blaming yourself, or instead of feeling like you're behind and you should really be at a higher level. We don't want you to live the rest of your time in embodiment, always feeling behind, always feeling you're not good enough. You are good enough at the level of consciousness you are at. And there is no reason to blame yourself for reacting at that level of consciousness, even reacting to when you have expressed Christhood and what other people do with it. But your reaction, when you're willing to look at it, is the opportunity to see the illusion of your present level and rise to the next level. It has always been that way, and it always will be that way. This was the same 2,000 years ago when Jesus came closer to the 144th level. It is the same for every one of us who has been in embodiment, and it will not change as long as the Earth is not a natural planet. Of course, there can be a shift where what is now the lowest level of consciousness is no longer allowed on Earth, but the basic mechanics of the path, where you're at a certain level, your reaction is the way you can see the illusion at that level so you can rise to the next level. This is the basic mechanics of the spiritual path. It may not seem as glamorous as some people want to make out the path to be, but I trust that many of you are at the point where you are saying, I've had enough of the illusions, I've had enough of the delusions of grandeur. I just want to know how the path works so I can make the fastest progress. And I can get above these unbalanced, negative, self-blaming reactions and be at peace with being here. My beloved, how do you ultimately be at peace with being here? Well, you need to resolve that birth trauma, because that is what took you out of the peace you had when you came as an avatar. But as part of this process, even when you have resolved the birth trauma, there will still be a separate self that you need to look at. And it can be individual for each one, but it is the separate self you created in reaction to the material realm, the matter realm, the mother realm, as it is on Earth. You realize that as an avatar you came from a natural planet where matter was not as dense. That means many things, but one of the things it means is that there weren't the kind of consequences you see on Earth. Mind was much more powerful in terms of changing matter. Matter was more responsive to mind on a natural planet. So you are used to that you could do something that you might call a mistake. It created a physical consequence. But when you were willing to step back and change your consciousness, you could undo that physical consequence. So when you came down here on Earth and recognized that you could make a choice here on Earth, and it would create a physical consequence that you couldn't overcome for the rest of that lifetime, and that might even follow you in other lifetimes, you were shocked at this. You were shocked at how dense matter was. Now take care of noticing. It had nothing to do with the fallen beings as such and the birth trauma they exposed you to. It was simply your reaction to the fact that matter is so dense on Earth that you can create consequences that you cannot easily undo, and it might linger for a long time. And so this created a separate self in reaction to this, where you often went into a negative reaction to the mother realm, where you often felt that you couldn't be comfortable, you couldn't be at peace in the mother realm, and that there was something wrong with the mother realm, that the mother realm shouldn't be this way. And you need to come to that revolutionary shift where you're willing to look at that and actually come to accept that planet Earth is a teaching device for a certain range of consciousness. And therefore, in order to give people the lessons they need to have, matter needs to be as dense as it is, matter needs to be as unresponsive to mind as it is, or the vast majority of people on Earth wouldn't learn their lessons. Now you as an avatar, you are not having to learn the same lessons that most other people on Earth have to learn. And therefore, you can overcome this, but you can only overcome it if you're willing to look at it, and if you're willing to come to that point of accepting that there's nothing wrong with matter. It was your reaction to matter that caused you to think there was something wrong with matter. And it is your responsibility to resolve that separate self. And only when you do will you be free to actually embrace being in physical embodiment. And in order to rise above a certain level of Christhood, you have to be at peace with being in physical embodiment. This was much more difficult to do at Jesus' time. That's why he couldn't even do it fully. But in today's age, you have that potential. And those of you who want to stay in